and welcome to the August edition of HR Hot Topics. I'm your host, Jody Schaefer, and my aim is to make this the most informative 10, let's be honest, folks, 10 minutes of your month. This month I want to talk about pay transparency, and this actually came about, I had a question from a client this week who had grumblings in the office. They're hearing about it second and third hand. Folks are upset with how much they make, or they find out a coworker makes significantly more than them. They don't understand why. They're threatening to ask for very big raises this year, or else perhaps you can relate to that. This idea of pay transparency and how much information to share about your pay practices is not new. Although for some of us that have been in the workforce for a long time, it can be really uncomfortable because we came up in an age where it was considered uncouth to talk about how much you make at work. It was kind of in the same realm as religion and politics at the dinner table. You just didn't go there. You didn't do it. That's not the age we live in anymore. Now, if you want to know how good something is, you read the reviews. If you have an experience, you liked it, you didn't like it, you write a review. And that happens in the workplace too. I mean, you can go on Glassdoor and you can read reviews from ex-employees. So this idea of transparency and telling people what you really think and what they're really going to get is gaining traction more and more, both in social and professional circles. On the professional side, we have seen a move towards posting starting pay in the job itself so people know. There are actually laws on the books in several states. Michigan's not one of them currently, but in several states that requires you to put the starting pay range on your posting so people know. Or they prohibit employers from asking about current pay or past pay. Excuse me. And then using that as a basis for what the starting offer is going to be. So there's a lot of movement around pay transparency. There are federal laws in place that require equal pay for equal work. That's really focused on making sure that you don't discriminate against protected classifications in your pay practices. But this idea of sharing how much people actually make within your organization is a little bit further step, right, out on that ledge. And so this client was asking, how much do I share? What do I do to kind of get ahead of this? And I think that's a really good perspective on this, to get ahead of this. There was a time when employers tried to just outright prohibit discussion of wages in the workplace, and that is actually illegal. You can't do that. The National Labor Relations Act forbids it. There are several state laws that also forbid it. So this idea that forbidding it means it won't happen is kind of a fool's dream. Of course, it's going to happen. People are very comfortable sharing all sorts of personal things about themselves, including how much they make. So I think shifting that perspective from banning, prohibiting, restricting it to instead getting ahead of it is the smart way to go. So how do you do that? The first thing that you need to do, I think, is a gut check. And this is what I told my client. What systems do you have in place right now to determine what fair pay is? Do you have wage bands for your positions? Even if you've never published them, in your mind, in your gut, do you sort of have an idea of low end, high end for each of the roles in your office? How do you know if those wage bands are competitive? Do you have resources that you look to on a regular basis to check the competitiveness of that rate in the market? When you post positions, are you posting those wage bands so that new applicants know? Do you have criteria that you're using to determine, especially for a new hire, where in the band you're going to place them for that initial offer? Again, maybe this isn't anything you've ever published or said out loud, but intrinsically you're looking at things like experience, licensure, certification, education, etc. And then once somebody's in your practice, what criteria are you looking at to determine if they're doing a good job? Do you have certain performance metrics that you track? Are you looking at certain behaviors around communication, teamwork, professionalism, et cetera, that are important to your practice? Those kinds of things are the structures, the building blocks for a good compensation, not only philosophy, but program. And the more of those you have in place, the more you have now to share with your team who's grumbling about this. Because this is really coming from a place of fear. And I think this is a fear that we can all relate to, this fear of not knowing, not having all the information. And so in the absence of information, we fill in the blanks for ourselves. It's human nature. You do it too. We all do it. Or fear of being taken advantage of, that somehow because you weren't a good negotiator or you didn't ask, that you're being paid less than the person who sits right next to you, who's doing the same or maybe even less work than you are, that somehow the employer is taking advantage of that situation. So fear is where a lot of these conversations are rooted in. So the idea of getting ahead of it in the conversation, I think, is really based on addressing some of those fears head on. If you don't have some of those systems and structures in place that I just went through, if you don't have pay bands, if you have no idea what's truly competitive in the marketplace, if you don't have an evaluation system in place to help provide feedback and goals for people to move up in the band and also into other positions within the organization, then that's where you need to start. There's an expectation that employees have that you are treating people fairly, not just in, how you allocate the work, but also how you reward them, both financially and with future advancement opportunities. And so if you don't have those kinds of things in order, that's on you to start putting together. Now, the good news is we help clients with that all the time. So if that feels overwhelming to you, you can reach out to a partner. HRM would be happy to be that partner for you and really start putting some of those building blocks in place. But if you do have some of those things in place, then I think the step for you is to have the conversation with the employees, and not one-off conversations, because they'll go back and they'll share with each other what you told them and what so-and-so heard, and that's not what they told me. That's a terrible idea. Pull the whole staff together. Let them know that you value them and you value their contributions, and that it's up to you to make sure that you're being paid, that you pay fairly for those efforts, that you want to retain them. And then share with them what you do have in place. Maybe you have salary bands, but you've just never vocalized them before. Now would be a good time to do that. If you're doing market analysis work annually or semi-annually, share that with them so they know where the data is coming from. If you have criteria that you weight more heavily than others in determining where along the band somebody would fall, tell them what those criteria are. Again, they don't necessarily have to agree with your perspective on this, but at least they know that there is a perspective, right? That there is information, and so they're not just filling in those blanks for themselves. And then if there are gaps, so for example, this client I was talking to felt like their evaluation system wasn't really solid anymore. It wasn't effective. And she was going to take that on herself as the administrator. I'm going to create a new evaluation system. And I was like, well, maybe, when you have the whole team together, you ask for volunteers who have a strong interest in that, and maybe you put together a little task force, and you can be on the task force, right? But there's a group of folks that are interested in this. They're the ones that are probably having the conversations in the first place. Give them a productive way to channel that energy and channel that knowledge and help them come up with the tool that will then be used to evaluate performance and behavior going forward. A lot more buy-in for sure, right? And it takes some of the work off of your shoulders and gives you kind of a more well-rounded view on the things that we should be looking at to determine what a good job looks like. So those are just some ideas. The other thing that I'll leave you with, if you're going to have a full group conversation around pay and transparency and what you have in place currently, is I think you need to give employees a productive, effective communication mechanism if they still have questions or frustrations around their own pay. Direct them what to do with those kinds of fears or frustrations. Who should they go to? How should that conversation transpire? What kinds of things should they bring with them to that conversation to justify their ask? Because otherwise they'll just continue to express frustration in these offshoot circles, and it's not productive, it's not effective. So leave them with an opportunity to have those conversations, but in a way that's going to make real change. I think I've covered everything. I actually was so prepared for this talk today because I had this exact conversation with the client just a few days ago. I want to make sure I've got everything in place. I think I did. I want to leave you with two other just quick notes here before I let you go. I talked about leadership training. We were doing leadership training, in-person leadership training. We did that in May. We did like a session 1. Session 2 is all around how to say hard things and recognizing, folks at work, which is different than necessarily some of the reward systems in place. So recognition and appreciation, how those two things may not be the same. And then some risk areas, some employment law risk areas that I think every leader needs to know about. That's really session 2 of our leadership training. And that is scheduled for, I've got the date here, September 26th. So if you attended session 1 in May, you would have already gotten an email giving you early access to register for that September 26th date. You do not have to have attended session 1 in order to register for session 2. It's covering different content. So we'll be opening that up to everybody once we know how many seats we have available. And then we're running session 2, too many numbers. We're running session 1 again, October 9th. So if you missed it the first time around, or it was full by the time you tried to register, October 9th is going to be the date for that, and we will release that registration information soon as well. So keep an eye on that. And with that, I will leave you. If you have questions about pay or transparency or any of the systems I talked about to develop that in your practice, in your organization, go ahead and give us a call. My email address is obviously at the bottom of the screen here. You can send an email. You can call us. My phone number is on the website, and we can help you with that. And then I'll link to some articles and some tools, as I always do, just to help you out. Make sure you're looking at the email message for those links. It's not going to be below the YouTube video because YouTube doesn't let us do links. So all of that will be in the email message. Make sure to check there first. Thanks.